She's a resident pessimist.
I know. I didn't know I hated love so much.
Kimberly McKinson, Assistant Professor of Anthropology.
Matthew Congdon, Assistant Professor in Philosophy.
Ashleigh Maxcey, Research Assistant Professor and Senior Lecturer in Psychology.
That's what we mean by defined. So if we mean something like a set of like necessary and sufficient conditions, I'd be skeptical just because we're thinking about like love of like lasagna, your partner, and love of a deity. I would say there's something more like a family resemblance between all these different instances of love rather than an essence running through all of them.
I think that Matthew is hitting on the point that emotions are variable from person to person. Part of it is based on our previous experience. But I would still argue that love can be defined for each individual person.
Central to all these different notions or variations of love is certain sets of emotions and experiences that to my mind become, socially constructed. They may play different roles and functions in a particular society or cultural context as well. That general idea encompasses, all these different variations.
Oh, juicy. Love can make you sick from the standpoint of I'm making decisions or I'm having reactions because I think I'm in love or because I'm experiencing love. Yes, I guess the sickness could be a downstream byproduct of love, but I would argue that whatever's making you sick is a consequence of your choices.
And then you need to think about how love is then situated within like kind of broader context of other emotions. So like, it seems like love, say, and jealousy are really closely related to each other. Severe forms of grief, that could be like pathologies that arise for humans that only inflict us because we're capable of love.
Love sickness is interesting, right? Are there particular ideas that we've been socialized into, right, that enable us to recognize it in others and perhaps recognize it in ourselves? Even like when we think about, the biology of love as well. It can result in that overproduction of dopamine that could then result in that kind of physical sickness as well.
Oh! Yes, finally, philosophy!
Whether or not, there's like a biological, root for it, because we've been, socialized into the idea, it really functions in a very real, very visceral way for people.
You can fall in love with a painting at first sight because everything that there is to appreciate about the painting is visually available. When I said disagree, I was thinking about persons. Like a genuine form of love that loves them as a whole person would have to appreciate that there's certain mysterious aspects of them. They have a complex inner life, a history that you certainly couldn't take in at first sight.
I cannot believe how much I'm agreeing with the philosopher right now. This is bananas. Part of the concept of love does definitely involve seeing beyond someone's faults. There's some research about the amount of illusion you need to have about someone else to love them. It's this idea of I know both your strengths and your weaknesses, and I love your weaknesses, I can see past them, or I actually see them as strengths.
I'm enthusiastic about this one, especially from a very young age. We not only need to have our material needs met, but in the conveying of care, it communicates the idea that you deserve to have your material needs met. Maybe there's a very bare kind of biological survival, but minimally flourishing, decent human life wouldn't be possible.
In many parts of the world, right, originally, what we think of as love was very much tied to notions of care, kinship, marriage. How does a society reproduce itself? How does it maintain itself? Love in that regard, I think, is important. If we're thinking about love at that very basic, stripped down, right? What is that love to is another question.
So I would argue that is social connection, and that social connection is not the same thing as love. So it could become love, of course. What happens without social connection, though, you're more likely to die something like 7 years earlier. Is social connection really important to thriving? Absolutely. Is love important to thriving? I don't think so.
Now I don't know my answer. I hadn't thought this out.
Okay, so if we're taking the reality show concept here seriously, then if, because I don't watch it, yes, if we are not seeing somebody and you're hearing the voice, that's also setting up certain projections in your mind. For example, we know that voices also become racialized, the language that people use, tonality. And so if you have a perception in your mind that you're best suited with somebody from your own racial group. If you hear a voice that doesn't sound like it belongs to that group, then that sets up certain notions about who this person is. I think there are all these other things that are really caught up with it.
One of my favorite philosophers, Iris Murdoch, and Simone Weil says this as well. Love is a form of attention. And then the answer would be something like, well, love is vision, in metaphorically speaking, seeing something outside myself without my preconceptions coloring it or making it into what I want it to be.
The whole idea that love is blind to also centers a certain oculocentrism, very particular to, I think, Western cultures. So it'd be interesting to, I think, ask this question in maybe like non-Western context.
Yeah, what she said. Ditto.
Nice.
I'm really proud of